Happy Hanukkah, everyone. Delighted to see everyone again. I feel like last week, towards the end, we kind of ran through a lot of really important themes. I want to kind of go through them a little bit, more methodically today because they're really important and really central to the Jewish perspective on a lot of very important themes. So we're talking about Tikkun Olam. It's obviously a big idea. We kind of demonstrated that idea, that point last week, that it's really a grand universal vision that we have. And then there's a question that Susan brought up, which is, okay, we have a universe and a world populated by lots and lots and lots of people, and yet we're talking about the Jewish perspective of Tikkun Olam. And, as Jews, we're, 14 million people or 15 million people? We're not such a big percentage, right? We're 0.02% of the world population. So what about everyone else? So fine, you told us, Rabbi Wolbe, you told us the role that the Jews are going to play. Well, what about the world at large? So I think it's a very, very important point, and I should have had it in my notes. I didn't have my notes. We'll talk about it now. So what's interesting is like this. Essentially, Tikkun Olam is for everyone. What does the world look like? We'll talk a little bit more about that today as well. But what does the world look like when the world is perfected? V'yeda kol pa'ul ki ata pe'alto. V'yavin kol yitzur ki ata yitzarto. V'yomar kol asher neshama b'po. Anyone speaks Hebrew? I'm like, whoa. French. Suddenly we became French.
like every fifth word.
Okay. That is a direct quote from the prayer we say multiple times, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's like this. We're talking about the future and this utopian dream. That's the end game of this world that we have. And everything will know that God made them. And every creation will understand that God created them. And everyone will say, the Almighty is king and controls everything, and his dominion is total. Is that just Jews? Well, it's Jews as well, of course. But that's everyone. And I'll say more. Everyone's familiar with the verse in Isaiah that we say, that our role amongst the nation is to be a or lagoim, a light to the nations. Right. Furthermore, the temple. The temple was the spiritual epicenter of the Jewish world. But also, it was a spiritual epicenter of the world at large as well. If you were a Gentile and the temple's around and you want to go, pay homage or give a sacrifice to the Almighty, you go to the temple. And in the temple, you bring a sacrifice. Oh, wait a minute, Rabbi, in the Jewish temple we have non-Jew sacrifice? Yes, it's not just the Jewish temple. It is a spiritual home in a physical world. Whoever wants to come and take part in that spirituality is welcome. So incidentally, our religion, we don't believe in proselytizing, yet we believe that spirituality and God is the God of everyone, not just the Jews. So then, okay, so if it's for everyone, so what's the role of the Jews? It means that we're in a pickle here. Okay, fine. So now, if we explain Tikkun Olam is really for everyone, that's what the world looks like when everyone knows of God. Well, what's our responsibility? Our responsibility is that we have an outsized portion, an outsized role in this transition. Through the Torah, we'll talk a little bit about that, how that works in a little bit. Through the Torah, right? Our destiny as a nation, our mission as a nation is to be the people that usher in this new world. To be the model nation everyone copies, everyone learns from us. And by the way, look at history. Let's look backwards. Okay, what were we saying 2,000 years ago, and what are people saying today? I read somewhere that if you want to know what the average person is going to be doing, right, throughout the week in 10 years, look at what the technologists are doing today during the weekends. Someone once said that. There's people that are kind of living in the future, and they're living the future today. We essentially, 2,000 years ago, were living in the future. We were living as Jews with ideas that were totally dramatic and radical at the time. Idea of one God. We were saying that 3,000 years ago. We were saying that 2,000 years ago. We were saying that in a world where that was a crazy, futuristic idea. That was insane. That was dramatically different than what the mainstream people believed. We were talking about every man created in the image of God. All men are created equal. Like, that's an idea that's very popular now, thanks to the Renaissance and thanks, to the spreading of democracy and the humanistic progress that has happened over the past 200-300 years. But that was not a normal idea 2,000 years ago, much less 3,000 years ago. People were assets. Right? You lived and died in the class you were born into. That's the world that was then. And what were we saying? We were saying there's a meritocracy. You control your own destiny. The entire world was created for me. You save one life, you save the entire world. We were saying a mamzer, a bastard who's a Torah scholar, takes precedence over a Kohen Gadol who's not a Torah scholar. Can you imagine? The highest office in the Jewish land, the Kohen Gadol, right? The leader, the spiritual leader of the people, and then you have the guy who was born because a brother and a sister slept together. Scandal. Shame. Can't get married with the Jewish people. A bastard, a mamzer. But that mamzer is a Talmud Chacham, is a Torah scholar. And he worked on himself. And he made something out of himself. And he's a greater Torah scholar than the high priest. Who gets the first latke? Who gets the first donut? Who gets the most important slot in the panel? Who gets the most honor? The Torah scholar. That's what we were saying 2,000 years ago. So essentially, to answer your question, the Jews, we are the influencers. We are the people and the nation and the ideals that are going to influence and infiltrate, if you will, it's a bad word, but are going to affect tremendous change and influence the entire world. And if you look at the world today, and people might not realize that if you look at the world today, it's a world that is dramatically different because of Jewish ideas, and Christians in America, like say Judeo-Christian ideas, which is nonsense. It's not Judeo-Christian ideas, it's Jewish ideas, and the Christians stole some ideas and perverted them. It's not Judeo-Christian ideas, it's Jewish ideas. Right? This is the world which is much closer to the Jewish ideology and the Jewish perspective of thousands of years ago. Why? Because we're almost done. The world is much closer to being perfect than it ever was. You'll say, Rabbi, look around the world, Yeah, okay, you could zone in to a micro trend over 5 years or 10 years. Oh, this, what happened to the families and what happened to all the stuff that's happening out there? Yeah, you're right. Go ahead. What do you say?
I said wars have never existed throughout.
Well, that's a good point. We are living right now in the most peaceful time in all of recorded human history. Right now. Like, Rabbi, what's going on in Syria? Yeah, okay, but that's nothing compared to what was going on at any other point in time in history. So we have a world where basic morals, basic rights, the role of the individual, right? The idea of the meritocracy, that all men are created equal, the idea of one God, the idea of morals, basic, absolute human morals, and those ideas are everywhere. We live in a world where there's much less war. Much less war, much less crime. How the crime rates in every area in America have since the 1970s. Right? Since 1994, the homicides halved in America. So yeah, of course, there's a lot of high-profile cases. We're not perfect. We're not done yet. But we are dramatically better than we've ever been. And that's something that's remarkable, But who brought this about? Who was there at the beginning that set this off in motion? We. Abraham's children, the family, the tribe, and ultimately the nation. And the nation got the Torah, they got the guidebook, and they have slowly but surely influenced the whole world. So yes, Tikkun Olam is for everyone. The end game is an entire world. There's no war, right? Not just no war amongst the Jewish people, but there's no war at all, right? There is an acceptance of the major ideas of Judaism. There's an adoption of the 7 Noahide laws. And that's for the world at large. And our responsibility as direct descendants of Abraham, as Jews who are guided by the Torah, right, and also use the Torah towards accomplishing the goal, we have outside responsibility because it's on our shoulders to make sure that we do that. How we do that is a very interesting question. Because you say, wait a minute. This is I think, a little bit more advanced discussion. The Jews, over the past 2,000 years, have been marginalized, have been hated, have been persecuted, have been exiled, have suffered tremendous pogroms and expulsions and inquisitions and Holocaust, and yet we affect change. It seems very bizarre. It's not like we were admired. Maybe we are today. The Jews are I think recently they made a study in America what the most admired religion in America might be the Jews. I like people in America, but in Europe it's probably different. But if we expand our horizon to look at history, it's interesting that we kind of influence the world, or at least our ideas influence the world, despite the fact that people, for reasons they couldn't even pinpoint, hated the Jews. So you have a hated nation, a downtrodden and scattered nation that affects the whole world. That's a good question, how exactly that works. We'll try to get into that. Maybe I have a few ideas to suggest. But to answer your question, yes, Tikkun Olam is for everyone. It's Olam. It's the whole world. It's universal.
That's what I thought. We were having a discussion about this today, and after I listened to your lecture from last week, and it just seemed to me, because when you talked about in the beginning, we talked about the whole world. So it couldn't then, in the end, just be the Jews. Jews have to be leaders. We have to facilitate the changes. Isn't that? In a simplistic level, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, but what's also interesting, I think this dovetails on the previous point of intrigue, is that we're not really instructed not only to not proselytize, but also to not go advocate. We don't need to go. We're not instructed anywhere to go teach the Gentiles, even the Gentile, the Noahide laws. So it's interesting, what's the plan to influence the world when we're not encouraged to go out and influence the world? There's no mitzvah that says that, go out and start lecturing. Right. And what it seems like is that it's as if the Almighty is kind of doing that work for us. How so? We're told that we're going to be scattered throughout the nations. And you know what? Look at Jewish history the past 2,000 years. There's no place, really, almost on this earth that we haven't spent significant time in. And we spend 400 years in Spain, and then we're bounced out. And then we spend a couple of years in France, and then we're kicked out of there. And we spend some time in England. In 1290, we're out. 1306, we're out of France. 1492, we're out of Spain and Portugal. Right? We have these little stops along to this universal train ride where we're going from place to place. And we don't know. It means if you ask the guy who's being persecuted, sometime in the Middle Ages, someplace in Europe, you're like, well, why do I suddenly have to leave? He doesn't realize that God has the much bigger picture, and the big picture for God is, okay, this is a traveling salesman. And we have to sell our wares to everyone. Well, how do you do that? You got to be there, right?
You have to live amongst them in order to affect
e-commerce? Huh?
What is? I was going to say the open market, but I'm guessing.
Well, you want to do e-commerce. E-commerce for Judaism? Maybe. That's not a bad idea. But it's interesting that, God is as if taking us on this, on this global journey to influence the whole world.
So that's how it happens.
So that's one way it happens against our will. And number two is that we are at the center of a lot of people's focus. We, as 0.2% of the world's population, should not really draw that much interest from the world's attention. If you go ahead. Well, whether they hate them, they hate them, but they're interested in them. To me, the bigger question is not why they hate them. Why are they even interested in them? I might have pointed this out before. I've certainly said this multiple times in different classes. I'll say it, I don't know. Again, in the year 2000, there was a census in China. Of course, every 10 years we have one here as well. How many people are living in this place, right? And whenever you have a census, you have a margin of error. Right? It's not always. It's out within 3-4%. Right? The margin of error for the Chinese census was 48 million people. So it's plus or minus 48 million people from what I remember. So there's 96 million people, right? That's the number, right? To fall into, that's the spectrum in which the number can really fall. Just the numbers. And our whole nation, all told, 14, 15 million people. How is it possible that we dominate the attention or we draw the attention, just now in American politics? Israel is always being discussed. Why? I think that the Almighty kind of planted within the psyche of the world this idea, look to the Jews. And therefore, we kind of are given this platform even though we don't go try to acquire it. There's no way the Torah say, go get the platform, but the Bible says, I'll arrange a platform, I'll make them interested in you, and I'll make you travel.
It seems like the platform is given to Israel and then Israel.
Yes, so that's a question. Why is the attention often, so vitriolic? Well, vitriolic is a very nice word. So violent is a better word, more accurate word. That's a very good question because we have attention, yet, which in itself is one question. On the other hand, we have this irrational hatred of Jews and of Israel that is universal, and that is in every culture, and it is totally irrational.
It's also inaccurate.
It's of course it's inaccurate, and there've been so many different reasons for it, right? Every culture finds what they hate, and they link that to the Jews. The Jews are super wealthy, okay, class warfare. The Jews are super poor, right? They make fun of them that they're poor. We killed their God, right? We drink Christian babies' blood, like all these things which are always they're untrue. We dominate the world's finance with the Elders of Zion nonsense.
There was a statistic that came on TV yesterday.
Go ahead.
That 56% of the hate crimes in the United States are against Jews.
Oh, wow.
Not against Muslims. It was 15%.
It was like 17% against the Muslims
Oh
in
yeah.
the United States.
Listen,
In the United States.
you don't need to convince me. The phenomenon or the phenomena of anti-Semitic activities. We have 1,000 years of data. Yeah. It is everywhere. It's pervasive. There's educated anti-Semitism, kind of the German anti-Semitism. There's the ignorant anti-Semitism in the form of maybe the Ukrainian anti-Semitism of the 17th century. You have every different kind of anti-Semitism. The question is why. I think one point that we talked about and maybe we explained is the idea that we have so much attention and such a spotlight on us. We're going to be talking about why there's so much anti-Semitism because it's related to our discussion.
And yet the President and the Attorney General are worried that there's going to be anti-Muslim feeling.
It's nonsense. Okay, so I want to talk about how this has actually worked in history and kind of link these ideas to maybe other ideas that all of you, or maybe some of you, or most of you, are familiar with. I know, Ed, you are. I'm sure you guys have heard this as well. So we find this idea in the Talmud. It's an idea that it's commonly known. Most people don't know where it's from, where it's sourced, and what it actually means. But it's very much germane to our subject. And this is actually from the Talmud. It's from the book of Sanhedrin. The page is 97a, and it reads as follows. They taught in the Academy of Elijah, which is a common way for the Talmud to give an introduction. Where was this idea taught? The world is 6,000 years, 2,000 years chaos, 2,000 years Torah, and 2,000 years Messiah. Okay, so 6,000 year world. We've all heard that idea. Most of us, I'm sure, have heard that idea. This is where it comes from. This is the source. Shis alfen shana hava alma. 6,000 years is the world, and it's broken down to 2,000 years of tohu, chaos, 2,000 years of Torah, and 2,000 years of Mashiach, Messiah. What does this mean? What's it telling us? What happens after 6,000? What is this breakdown of 222? Let's dig into this. So first thing, this Gemara is giving us the best synopsis of what we've been speaking about, of this idea of purpose, the idea of Tikkun Olam. And essentially we're talking about the project that we call this world, and the world has a beginning, and it has a conclusion. Right? There's a process, there's development, there's progress, there's a transition from a broken world to a fixed world. We start off with 2,000 years of chaos. Chaos, in the Talmud's words, mean chaotic because there's a lack of awareness of God. That's what it means. You start off with history, and it's a broken world entirely because all you have is chaos. In the year 1948, from Adam, right? Not after the Common Era of the Common Era. 1940, easy number to remember. Abraham was born. Traditionally, Abraham is the one, like we mentioned before, who is going to end the era of chaos. He is going to develop and popularize the idea of God, the idea of morality, the idea of kindness, the idea of faith. We have, the Midrash tells us that when Abraham's 52 years old, he starts studying Torah. Now we know that's problematic. How do you study Torah before the Torah is given? But you can, right? It's possible to study Torah before it was given. Remember, if Abraham's a prophet, that's one easy answer to the problem.
So did it come to him in his sleep while he was...
Maybe. If he was a prophet, it came to him in like inorganic fashion. I think Abraham actually studied it from within because he tapped into the power of his soul to understand the Torah. I've spoken about this at length in other places. I don't want to rehash that too often. But the Talmud says, the Midrash actually says, that Abraham studied Torah me'atzmo, from himself. So he tapped into the power of his soul, like the soul 40 days. The soul in utero studies Torah. You forget it, but it's still there. If you're able to uncover it, you can re-tap into that. So Abraham starts studying Torah at the age of 52, exactly at the 2000th year of the world. Thus ends the world of chaos. It's no longer entirely dark. We have a flicker. We have, there's something here. We have an ember that is going to develop. Abraham and Abraham's family. Thus, we enter the second transition, which is Torah. Well, whose Torah is it? It's God's Torah, but then God gives it to us. Who's us? The Jewish people. So we have now 2,000 years of Torah, which is essentially its insular growth. It's Abraham and Abraham's children, Abraham's family, Abraham's tribe, Abraham, the Jewish people, Moses and Mount Sinai. The people are isolated. They're living in the land of Israel. They're growing in Torah, and they're developing a powerful nation. But the world at large is still totally ignorant of the idea of God. We have 2,000 years from Abraham till the world even hears it, till these ideas start to penetrate the world at large. What do we have? We have Torah. Torah is building the Jewish nation. We have 2,000 years of that. And in the most recent 2,000 years, suddenly we see an explosion of our ideas taking root universally. That's the idea of Mashiach. Mashiach is, in Jewish terminology, the word for describing the era at the end of this process of Tikkun Olam. That's what Mashiach means. It's not, of course it could be understood as one guy or one specific point in history, but we're told that there's 2,000 years of Mashiach. 2,000 years of Mashiach. That's a process of taking not only a nation and having that nation being exemplary, the Jewish nation, but now it's the time to actually finish the Tikkun Olam by having the entire world be influenced. That's what we're told, Maimonides, that the idea of Christianity as this sub-religion of Judaism, and similarly Islam, that is part of the global effort to teach the world about God. Essentially, they are our partners in a weird way of popularizing these ideas.
What ended the second 2,000 years?
I'm sorry?
What ended the second?
Nothing. We're still in it.
So there's 4,000 years?
We are right now in the last 300 years of the 6,000, of the last 2,000.
Yeah, what ended you have the 2,000 you said, and then there was another. Is that the
Yes.
2000?
No. So it goes a little bit further. There's a discussion about that. One opinion says, well, 2000, but it's not exactly 2000. That's one opinion. The other opinion says that if you look at the end of the central authority of the Jewish people, right? When the Sanhedrin finally disbanded in the end of the 4th century, that's almost exactly to the day. So that's essentially when the Jewish people are no longer bound and insularly focused. Right? We no longer have the last element of a central authority that kept us, kind of united as a single solitary nation. Now we're totally scattered throughout the nation, and we're kind of going on our missions to influence the world, even unwittingly. So that's the other answer. But 2 answers to that question: either destruction of the Second Temple, or 170 years later, or 100 some odd years later. Well, it depends how we're counting, but maybe even multiple hundred years later, 300 years later, when the Sanhedrin finally disbands, there's no longer any centralized authority for the Jewish people. Every office that has dominated the leadership roles, from the kings, the prophets, to the judges, to the high priesthood, and lastly, finally the Sanhedrin, all those are disbanded, and now we're transitioning into us as a bunch of sleeper cells, so to speak, influencing the world, even unwittingly. So what does this tell us? This tells us, this Talmud tells us, this is a big overview. Let's look back at history. Let's see where we are. What is our progress reports for Tikkun Olam? We see 2,000 years of chaos. Abraham comes, 2,000 years of Torah, and now we're in the process. And we look back historically. We see, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. We see the world is being influenced by the ideas of the Jewish people. The themes of Mashiach are taking root. What's interesting is that even though the destination is set, right? It makes it very clear that 2,000 years is the world. 6,000 years is the world. 2,000 years chaos, 2,000 years Torah, 2,000 years Mashiach. We have the destination, right? We have the X in the map of history where we are going. And that's called Mashiach. That is set in stone. What is not set in stone is the process that we're going to take to bring that. Essentially, right? This is already well known to people thousands of years ago. The Jews are going to be fulfilling their mission of bringing Tikkun Olam. Number 1. Number 2, we are going to be doing that, but we don't know how we're going to do that, in which manner, which process we're going to do that. We know the end game, we don't know how we're going to get there. And the Talmud says there's 2 ways to get there. There's 2 ways we can get there. This is again from the Talmud Sanhedrin, that Mashiach comes only in a generation that's entirely righteous, or in a generation that's entirely wicked.
I think we're voting on the wicked side at this point.
Well, I'm not willing to sell out quite yet. Wendy. But either way, what it's telling us is that there's really 2 avenues we can take. There's 2 paths towards Mashiach. One is entirely righteous, one's entirely wicked. What does that mean? Or perhaps we can say, every Jew takes for themselves a path in how they're going to contribute to that destination. Entirely righteous, entirely wicked. Or every generation takes a path in what they're going to do to contribute towards this development. But it seems problematic. How is it possible that both being righteous and being wicked, which is the exact opposite, bring to the same end? It doesn't seem. I mean, if I drive east and I drive west, right, how could you possibly end up in the same destination? Well, maybe if you go around the world, okay, but that's taking this analogy a little too far, right? But it doesn't seem to make any sense. The answer to this question is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism. Okay, now you got to put your thinking caps on here. The answer to that quandary, how is it possible that two divergent paths heading in different directions bring to the same destination, is anti-Semitism. You don't get that, okay? No one does yet. Okay, how so? Okay, I want everyone here to, not everyone here, but let's see. You guys have your chumashes in front of you, right?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, I want someone to open up to chapter 29 of Deuteronomy. Verse, I don't know which verse it is. I don't know which parsha it is either.
You'll figure it out in a second. I have to look on with you, I know, Dan.
Do you give you a rental fee?
No, we didn't have a sondage, sorry, look at one.
What do you guys see there? Okay, go to 29, 21. I don't know what page it is. I don't have a chumash in front of
It
me.
is page 1256.
Okay, so
It was divine that I
That was,
turned to the
you
right
opened
page.
it right up to that.
how do you like that? Okay, Ed, why don't you read those 6 verses? We're looking for the Torah's descriptions of what happens when we choose the path of wickedness.
Yeah.
What happens, and how does that teach the world about God? Go ahead.
Say will the generation that follows later your children, who will arise after you, and the foreigner who will come from a land that is distant, when they shall see the plagues of that land and its illnesses which Hashem has afflicted unto it.
So let's do a little introduction. If you read Deuteronomy,
1256.
21.
21.
verse 21. Okay, so in Deuteronomy, it makes it very clear. If we behave, if we follow the path of righteousness, good things will happen to us. If we follow the path of wickedness, bad things will happen to us. So this is talking about what is the postscript of bad things happening to us, and how do people react to when they see the downfall of the Jewish people? Go ahead. So continue reading. So everyone's going to ask. Go ahead.
Sulfur and salt, a burning of all of her land, it cannot be sown, and it cannot sprout, and there cannot rise up on it any grass. Like the upheaval of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which Hashem overturned in his anger and in his wrath, and say that all the nations, for what reason did Hashem do so to this land, while the flaring of the anger is great as this? And they will say, for the reason that they forsook the covenant of Hashem, the God of their forefathers, that he embellished with them when he took out from the land of Egypt, and they went and they served the gods of others, and they prostrated them to them, gods that they knew not, nor did he allot to them. So flared the anger of Hashem against that land, to bring upon it all of the curse that is written in this book. And Hashem uprooted them from upon their soil, with anger and wrath, and with the fury that was great. And he cast them another land, as it is this day.
So let's stop here. We have a very interesting idea being conveyed here. Terrible things are going to happen to the Jewish people, and then everyone's going to be asking the question, why do such terrible things happen to the Jewish people?
Because they're Jews.
And then I get the answer, because they abandoned God. The nations are going to see what's going to happen to the Jews. They see all terrible things. And they ask, why do such terrible things happen to the Jewish people? And the answer is because they abandoned God. What lesson do the nations learn?
Or they may just say it's because they deserved it.
Well, okay, but the Torah is describing a
That's
process
the
here.
anti-Semitic
Exactly.
line of it. Yeah,
What the Torah tells us is that there's going to be a tremendous lesson that the Jewish people would teach. The Jews are going to go down a path of wickedness. And what happens to go down wickedness? All the curses and all the terrible things that are described in Deuteronomy are all going to come true. And it's going to be such a disaster that the Gentiles and everyone who has the attention, like we spoke about Wendy, everyone's looking at the Jewish people and saying, why do such terrible things happen? And then they learn a tremendous lesson about God. The Jews abandoned God, and that's why these things happen to them. What is the result of that lesson? Mashiach, Tikkun Olam. The world knows about God.
Yeah, right.
But it knows about the God because of our wickedness. And we're not there kind of to be the great heroes. everyone learns from our destruction. We think of Mashiach in very rosy terms. We think of it as, wonderful, we finally get cash in for all this hard work, 2,000 years of hard work. What the Torah is telling us here is that, Mashiach is a universal endgame. That's going to happen. As Jews, we choose. Do we want it to be in the best of terms? That we're the light to the nation. We teach the world about God. We're the models. Everyone looks up to us. We have the prominence amongst the people. Or are we going to opt to say, let's abandon God. Let's abandon our ideals. Let's go serve other gods, which, by the way, we learned about what that even means. It means to not prioritize God in our life. We don't prioritize God. God comes and smites us. And then, you know what happens? Everyone learns about God. The result is exactly the same. Exactly. The destination is clear. The world learns about God because of us. However, it's our choice. Is it going to be because of us? Or is it going to be despite of us? Is it going to be in a generation that's entirely righteous or in a generation that's entirely wicked?
Well, Rabbi, since anti-Semitism is what it is, and it's always going to be there, if it
so let's say
ended up
anti-Semitism.
being as a result of the righteous, then the rest of the world wouldn't even look at us, right?
So let's talk about anti-Semitism. What would you surmise the Almighty wants? Which path does the Almighty want us to take? The Almighty loves us. Path of righteousness.
Yeah, of course.
Everyone agrees? Okay. Now, it's fixed that if we abandon the path of righteousness and we choose the path of wickedness, we're not going to be destroyed. Because remember, we have to bring the world to Tikkun Olam. That is the promise made to Abraham. Right. That has to happen. However, it's going to happen through our downfall. Mm-hmm. Thus, it's not possible in history, no matter how bad we get, we cannot disappear.
Destroyed, yeah, right.
So the Almighty is going to try to take or he's going to create a encouragement tool to nudge us back into the path of righteousness. We're traveling the path of righteousness, and then you know what happens? Life happens, and we have free will. And free will enables a lot of decisions, and we get to the fork in the road, and we can opt to choose the path of wickedness. And you get a little comfortable, and it's much more appealing, it's much more exciting, it's much more scintillating. It has the pizzazz and the allure. And you say, the path of wickedness, that's what I'm going to choose. And you go down that path. And in your head, this is wonderful. But God knows what's the end game of that? It's really bad. We have to find a way to get you back on the other side. Well, how to get to the other side? You have to make your life in that path so miserable that you want to go find the other path. Anti-Semitism is the little stops and the pit stops on the road of the path of wickedness. We can choose the path of wickedness, and it may be exciting to begin with, but over time, it's going to get very, very unbearable. And that will hopefully nudge us back to the better path. And in history, we look back at history, outbreaks of anti-Semitism happen when the Jews are on the wrong trajectory, when they're on the path of bringing the world to God via a nation of being entirely wicked. And that, yes, it could happen, right? And we could insist on taking that path, but the Almighty loves us. And He wants us to get back on the right path, on the path of righteousness.
Rabbi, but there's
Go ahead.
15 million Jews, okay?
Yes.
What percent of those are righteous? How are you going to bring the rest? If you have 2 to 3% of righteous, how are you going to bring the other 97% to the righteous position? I think we're all going to go
Okay.
down.
That's another thing. There's many sources in the Talmud talk about the fact that if you remember, the words of the Talmud are a generation of entirely righteous and a generation of wicked.
Okay.
It means that we're judged as a collective. The Talmud says, well, what happens when the Jewish people are misbehaving and they have to get punished, right? Okay, they get punished, but let's spare the righteous. I say, wait a minute, why we spare the righteous? They're part of the nation. What happens? There's a conversation the Talmud records in the book of Megillah, where Achashverosh and Haman are having a conversation. Let's get rid of the Jewish people. But and it says, how are we going to get rid of the people? So Haman says, well, they're a bunch of sinners. So Achashverosh says, yeah, they're a bunch of sinners, but the rabbis, they're righteous. So what does Haman respond? Right? Am echad. There's one nation, which is a verse from his dialogue with Achashverosh in the Megillah. There's one nation. We are judged as one nation. If we skew towards the wicked, even though there may be some people that are righteous, we're a generation that's entirely wicked. And conversely, if we have some stragglers that are wicked, but predominantly we're righteous, then we're a generation that's entirely righteous.
How do we get to that point, though?
That's a good question. And that's Torah. That's the next step. That's Torah. But anti-Semitism is God's way of encouraging us to not take the path of entirely wickedness. Because you know what? As bad as anti-Semitism is, as painful, as torturous, as embarrassing, as tragic as anti-Semitism is, it's not half as bad as what looks like further down that road of entirely wickedness, of teaching the world about God, but us being totally destroyed. It's much preferable, as painful as that sounds, than the other alternative. And I'll tell you guys some cool stuff in history. In 1844, in fact, in the 19th century, the whole century, if we could expunge one century from the past 2,000, that's the one we would do it. It was a century where things went south in such a dramatic way. It's such a death spiral. Such terrible things happened to the Jewish people, spiritually and also physically, right? But spiritually predominantly, wherein we have, for the first time, since the Karaites, right, 1,000 years prior, the first time in 1,000 years where you have organized Jewish rejection of basic ideas of Judaism.
Yeah.
The first time.
The Reform movement.
Well, the early Reform, the German Reform, that's right. It's the first time where you have not just the individuals, but you have organized, right, a movement away from God, away from Torah, away from mitzvahs, away from everything. And by the way, we say Reform, I just want to point out, the Reform today are like the biggest, most righteous people compared to the Reform of yesterday, right? If you went to France in the 1860s, I read descriptions about what the Jewish community was like in France in the 1860s. There were less than 500 Jews that were Shomer Shabbos, that observed Shabbos in the entire France, which was one of the biggest populations of Jews. The rabbis prided themselves that their synagogues were entirely no different than churches. Services on Sundays, rabbis dressed like priests, meant exactly. It was like, whoa, where'd that come from? Unbelievable, right? You have 250,000 Jews convert to Christianity in the 19th century. 250,000. Some of them famous, like you may have heard of Karl Marx or Benjamin Disraeli, who became the Prime Minister of England. Someone like Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was a prime example of a Jew from the 19th century. A Jew who was entirely estranged from Judaism. Couldn't read Hebrew, didn't observe any mitzvahs, didn't know any Jewish. Oh, Christmas is nothing. No big deal. Like he didn't really, his own kid didn't give him circumcision. He didn't give him a bris milah. His wife wasn't probably even Jewish. There's a debate about that. His wife Julie. He was an example of a common Jew of that time, because you have 100 years, and essentially started even earlier. But since the emancipation of Jews from Europe, the Jews are allowed to become citizens and welcome. They're like, oh, look at this path of wickedness. It's so inviting.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. We could be citizens. We could own land.
That's right.
We could, go attend universities. We could engage in commerce. We could do things that we were never allowed to do in Europe. And what happens? All the doors that were closed for 500 years in Europe, right? Jews were allowed to move to every place, right? Allowed to move to England. Jews were not allowed to live in England from 1290 for 500 years. Right? William Shakespeare never saw a Jew in his life. There weren't Jews there for 500 years. There weren't. 1290, the Jews were expelled from England. Suddenly we're welcome. Huh? That's right. Which shows you that anti-Semitism is, that transcends actually ever encountering a Jew. But suddenly, overnight almost, right? Napoleon emancipates Europe. The Jews are granted citizenship everywhere. And then they're stuck, and they have long beards, and they have big payas, and they got weird hats and weird customs, and this and that. And they go, oh, what's going to be with us, We can't walk down the path of wickedness. We won't be accepted if we have all our Jewish hang-ups. So they start dropping the Jewish hang-ups. In 1844, there's a convention in Brunswick in Germany where they officially agreed that kosher is no longer applicable, laws of Shabbos no longer applicable, laws of married Jews are no longer applicable. Nothing. They made a declaration, and this was, people were freaking out, like, what's going on with this? And what's happening to the Jewish people? Rabbi Israel Salanter, the most influential rabbi of that century, he declared in 1844, he said, the Jews of Germany rejected the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. There's going to come a time where the Gentiles are going to force them to readopt the Jewish law. 91 years later, laws of Nuremberg, Jews cannot mingle with non-Jews, Jews cannot marry non-Jews. Whoa, why are the Gentiles doing that? Because that's what happens when you go down that path. It's happened every time in history. It's happened because this is the way the Almighty loves us. And you say, Rabbi, Holocaust means the Almighty loves us? Really? Well, I'll ask the question back to you. Is it possible the Almighty does not love us? The Torah says that Banim atem l'Hashem Elokechem, we're children of the Almighty, and He doesn't love us? That's not possible either. It's hard for us to see love when we get smacked across the face. It's very hard. And when the Almighty smacks, He smacks hard. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant at all. Oh, yeah, but it's got some force. There's some oomph in that smack. And you know what? It's very, very hard for us to see the love when we're getting treated so terribly, so tragically.
Well, all we have to do is go read Deuteronomy and
yeah, well, it's easier said than done, right?
But it's all there,
But this is what we see again and again. This may have been the most dramatic example of anti-Semitism, but it happens every time. Every time the Jews, they start veering away from their mission, they get nudged back. They veer far, they get nudged harder. They veer almost entirely away, they get trounced till they go back. And you know what? You look at where we are today. We have, in 1953, in Israel, right, in the ashes that they're trying to rebuild after the war destroyed almost everything. If you were to make a prediction as to what's going to be with the Jewish people, you would say, yeah, that's it, it's over. They can't live in Europe anymore. Europe is clearly not hospitable for Jews. America was not a good place for Jews. The Jews were assimilating at incredibly high rates. And Israel wasn't a state yet. There was nothing there. And you know what? Even once there was a state, what's going to be with Torah? What's going to be with this path of righteousness? In 1952, or 59, exactly which year it was, the leader of the Torah community in Israel, the Chazon Ish, he met with Ben Gurion, very famous meeting, where they negotiated a deal that the 400 Torah scholars that were studying in yeshiva in Israel will be exempt from army service. Why? Because Ben Gurion realized that the Torah world was almost entirely destroyed in the war. It's time to start rebuilding. And you know what? To them, it's like, okay, 400 students. It's not insignificant. But what's 400 students? How many students are there today studying Torah full-time?
Thousands.
How many students are there today studying Torah full-time? Yeah. When I was in Israel 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, someone reliable gave me the figure of 145,000 people studying Torah full-time. That is an explosion of Torah. Where's that from? That's from us being pushed back on the path of entirely righteous. And was it pleasant? Not at all. It's the most painful and most tragic episode in all of human history, arguably. And you know what? It was predicted. Because it's happened again and again and again and again. It's a theme that the Torah tells us. The Torah makes it very clear. This is one example. There's other examples as well. There's tens of examples in Deuteronomy alone where it spells it out. We veer, we suffer. But in the aggregate, that's actually better for us. Because suffering along the path of wickedness is better, preferable, than suffering at the end, at the destination point on the path of wickedness. That's much worse. So say, Wendy, to answer your question, anti-Semitism, it's not fun. It's not pleasant. No one's going to make that argument. And of course, I can't stress that enough, how unpleasant it is. Thankfully, in America today, we, at least right now, we have very, very little historical anti-Semitism, a historical scale. Is it gone? We know it's not gone, right? It's never gone. It's always there. It's always lingering. And to answer, once again, clearly it's not pleasant. This is not inspiring. Although I may argue that when there's meaning in suffering, when you realize why you're suffering and it's for a purpose, it's a little bit easier to bear. And a lot of people, did have that feeling because the Torah makes it clear. Like read Deuteronomy, it's clear that that's what's happening here. So it's not inspiring. It's maybe a little bit more meaningful, anti-Semitism in this light. But when you're able to zoom out and look at the big picture and look at the 6,000-year perspective, and we're getting close to the end. We're getting close to the end, and it's very important that before we're at the end, we're on the right path. And anti-Semitism is the way that God employs to push us outside of the realms of entirely wicked, where suddenly the world that was so inviting just so recently is not hospitable to us at all. The people that we wanted to become affiliated with and want to associate and want to assimilate and be like are suddenly saying, let's round you up and put you guys down. Whoa, what happened? How did this erupt in the most cultured, most civilized, most logical of societies and countries in the world? Well, that is where the departure towards wickedness began. Is it a shock that maybe will be the epicenter of the response that's going to happen to that shift? I don't know. As unlikely as that seems. Either way, what this tells us here, just to go back to our subject matter, yes, Tikkun Olam is for everyone. Tikkun Olam is universal. Yes, we are going to bring it about. That is the pledge to Abraham. That's going to happen. The destination is clear. Mashiach is coming. Now, Mashiach, not the individual or the incident or the point in time, but the 2,000-year process is going to be completed. Who is going to be in charge of bringing about the completion? Us, the Jewish people. How we're going to do it? That's in our hands. We can choose the option of entirely righteous. Fantastic. That's the harder option, but we get the most out of it. We're the light to the nation. We're the Ola Goyim. We inspire everyone. We can choose the option of entirely witness. It's not going to work, right? Well, it will work. It will bring us to Tikkun Olam. It will bring us to Mashiach. It will teach the world about God, but there's a lot of anti-Semitism along that way. And hopefully anti-Semitism will have its meaningful effect to encourage us to get back to the path of entirely righteousness. But the next question. Okay, now we're on the path of entirely righteousness. What now?
Free will.
Okay, well, free will is ever present. What about the path of Torah brings about Mashiach? This is a question that I referenced earlier. Let's assume that we are doing everything correctly. We're being taken throughout the world to influence everyone. We have the spotlight on us. And now we're teaching the world about God. But how we do it? We're studying Torah. Well, what about Torah contributes to Tikkun Olam? How is our national mission and national destiny fulfilled with our national focus, with our national pastime? What about the Torah brings about Tikkun Olam? Ain't that an interesting question? So I'm going to give a quick answer, and maybe we're going to go. I think this is the next phase of our discussion. Is going to be Torah, because Torah is that's what it's all about. Briefly, what is the reason why the world is broken to begin with? If you guys remember, we spoke about this last week. It might have been 2 weeks ago. Maybe it was last week. It's all bleeding together. Why is the world broken? Because we don't have God. Why not? Right? We have a soul. The soul is deeply and intimately connected to God. What about our soul makes the world broken? Well, the answer is nothing. The soul's not the problem. The body's the problem. It's covered up, exactly. It's covered up by the body and the minister of the body, which we call the Yetzer Hara. The reason why the world is broken is because we have the Yetzer Hara. What is the antidote to the Yetzer Hara? What strips away the power of the body and the Yetzer Hara? Torah. Via the Yetzer Tov as well, that's right. Torah. I'll tell you even more. The Yetzer Hara, that is the choice of the path of entirely wickedness. The pizzazz and the excitement and all the things that we reference with this world, the physicality, the materialism, all that pizzazz and allure, that's why it's so exciting to go down that path. What happens when we have Torah? Well, Torah is instructions. What are the instructions directly in opposition of? The Yetzer Hara. This world. The Torah is all about self-denial in this world. Self-denial to your Yetzer Hara, self-denial to your body, self-denial to your whims, to your desires, to your whimsicals. It's about building willpower. It's about taking the path of the soul. Thus, Torah enables us to dominate and control our Yetzer Hara with its instructions. Now, just one little ribbon on top here. We're told in the Talmud that there's this donkey, this white donkey, that Abraham rode with Isaac to slaughter him, binding of Isaac. Took a donkey. That same donkey, Moses took from Midian to Egypt. And that same donkey, Messiah is going to ride on. Messiah is in Jewish literature is called Ani Rochav al Chamor. He's a poor person riding on top of a donkey. Which donkey? Same donkey. What this means is a good question. Why is it white donkey? Okay, fine. But in Jewish philosophy, the idea of a donkey, chamor, is related to the word chomer. Chomer is materialism. What happens when Abraham rides on a donkey? It means he controls the donkey. Moses, Messiah, control the donkey. They reign in their physicality. Abraham, he is in charge of the first 2,000 years. He brings change in the world of chaos. Moses gives us the Torah. Messiah is the preeminent figure of the last stage of Tikkun Olam. All three of them use the same process. All three of them achieved Tikkun Olam via mastery, dominion, control of their chamor, of their chomer, of their physicality. Thus, perhaps we make the argument, the Torah enables to bring us to Tikkun Olam by stripping away our Yetzer Hara, which is the problem to begin with, and thus is exemplified by the three great leaders that marshaled or are going to marshal those three transformations in the trajectory of Jewish and world history. But this is going to lead us to the next frontier of core beliefs of Judaism, and that's Torah. I look forward. Thanks a lot, everyone, for Eilch and Chanukah. This was wonderful and exciting. I look forward to doing this again next time. Any questions?
Very good.
Great class, thanks.
Yes, go ahead, Wendy.
What do you do with Yetzer Hara and people that are out to destroy the world?
Well, it's very dangerous, but I'll point out, you say destroy the world.
Yeah. I mean,
It seems like there are some limitations to our free will. Remember,
Talk about ISIS.
yeah.
well, let's talk about a Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh had his heart hardened.
Yeah. Right.
That is counter to the Jewish model, right? Because why we believe in free will. hardened heart means that God is interfering with free will. The answer is that this 6,000 year process cannot be interrupted by free will. Free will has to exist within the confines of those rigid rules of 6,000 years. No one can choose with their free will to interrupt that. Thus, if someone says, I want to destroy the Jewish people, well, you can't do that. If someone makes the choice to destroy the Jewish people, they cannot do it. Do you know why? Because the Jewish people need to be there for fulfilling this 6,000 year plan. And therefore, they are interfering with God's plans, right? God's plan is that God's pledges to have us there at the end, right? So yes, there are limits. You destroy the world, you can't destroy the world. Nuclear war can never happen. Right? Mutually assured destruction can happen because humans do not have the ability to destroy the arena that they are in which they are granted free will. They can destroy a lot of things within that arena, but not the arena itself, not the playground, so to speak, which is the world and which is this process.
So you believe that we will not have a nuclear war?
Oh yeah,
because of that?
not a question.
Okay.
Not a question.
Interesting.
Yes, not a question. Not worried about that.
Well, you know,
We are allowed almost everything. It means our evil can spread almost anywhere. However, it cannot destroy the world.
Abraham was the beginning, and Moses is the beginning. Mashiach is the end.
Well, Moses is sort of in the middle. Right, Moses is 6 generations after Abraham, after the 6,000 years. Moses is 500 years into it.
But the end is
Right, but
he's the end.
that's right. It has to be the end. That's right.
So what are we going to be doing on Rosh Hashanah in the year 6000?
Well, I don't know. Hopefully, we won't have to get there.
You and I probably will not see that.
That's 300 years from now.
We might be
I think it's less than that.